Thank you for downloading from the BBC. For details of our complete range of podcasts and our terms of use, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.
Welcome to the latest global news, recorded at 14 hours GMT on Sunday the 11th of March. This is Andrew Peach with a selection of highlights from across BBC World Service news today. Coming up, an American soldier kills more than a dozen people in Afghanistan after wandering off his base in Kandahar. An Egyptian doctor is acquitted after being accused of forced virginity tests during last year's uprising. Also, Japan mourns the dead from the disaster a year ago.
It has been 1 year since the Great Eastern Japan earthquake. We are all gathered together in deep mourning to offer condolences to the deceased.
And why Germany's love affair with solar power may be over. First, the battle for hearts and minds had been going badly for the foreign troops in Afghanistan as it was. Now, an American soldier has wandered off his base in Kandahar and shot at least 15 people dead while wounding several others. The soldier then gave himself up to the American military authorities. What brought him to do this is still unclear, but it bodes ill for the foreign mission in Afghanistan. I asked our correspondent Quentin Somerville in Kabul to tell us more about the incident.
Well, we believe the soldier left his base at about 3 a.m. in the morning, so in pitch darkness. Then he entered a number of Afghan homes and he went house to house, unloading his weapon, killing Afghan civilians, women and children among the dead. And this kind of event is, as far as I'm aware, unprecedented. We're far more used to Afghan military, Afghan police turning their guns on their foreign allies than a US soldier behaving in this way. We are told that he had some kind of nervous breakdown before leaving the base. After he killed the civilians, he then returned to the base and gave himself up to the authorities. In that area, Panjwee district in Kandahar, the local people have taken to the streets to protest against these killings.
Coming so shortly after the burning of the Qurans, what's the impact of it likely to be in terms of the mission in Afghanistan?
Well, it can't be good for the mission, which is already suffering greatly because of the Quran burning. When American soldiers, they say, accidentally burned the Muslim holy book at a detention facility near Kabul, that really poisoned relations. I mean, let's try and remember, international troops, international forces are the Afghan people's allies. They're here to fight, to join with the Afghan security forces in the fight against the Taliban. But this, increasingly, that relationship between the Afghans, between British, American, French soldiers, looks increasingly poisoned.
Quentin Somerville speaking to me from Kabul. A court in Cairo has acquitted an army doctor accused of carrying out forced virginity tests on women protesters during the uprising last year. The acquittal was announced in the state media. John Lyne reports from Cairo.
A month after the ousting of Hosni Mubarak last year, a group of women were arrested as they took part in a demonstration in Cairo. They said that while in army detention, they were subject to forced virginity tests. One of the women, Samira Ibrahim, pressed legal action against the army doctor she said carried out the tests. He's now been acquitted by a military court. Details have not emerged yet from the hearing, but earlier Samira Ibrahim claimed that witnesses she believed would testify for her had changed their story. The case has provoked enormous anger amongst activists in Egypt. Already demonstrators have started gathering to protest against the ruling.
John Lyne in Cairo. Much of Japan came to a halt on Sunday for 1 minute as people paused to reflect on the exact moment a year ago that the northeast of the country was hit by an earthquake and tsunami. 20,000 people were killed and the nuclear crisis at Fukushima was triggered. Our correspondent Roland Burke has been following the events from the city of Kusenema.
The tsunami warning sirens rang out again today across Japan's northeast coast, marking the precise moment the earthquake struck 1 year ago, triggering mountainous waves. In flattened towns, people stood to remember the dead and missing. In Tokyo too, they mourned. The national ceremony was led by the emperor.
It has been 1 year since the Great Eastern Japan earthquake. We are all gathered together in deep mourning to offer condolences to the deceased.
Over the last year, thousands of workers have piled up much of the wreckage on the coast, 22 million tonnes of it. But there's been little rebuilding. Entire towns are wastelands. This was a day of remembrance, but many people say what troubles them is they can't forget.
I wanted to save people, but I couldn't. I couldn't even help my father. I can't keep on crying. What can I do but keep on going?
Even hours after the ceremonies were over, families were arriving in Kesenuma, some in suits and black ties. They laid flowers at the places where their homes once stood and their loved ones were lost.
That was Roland Burke. You're listening to Global News, the best stories, interviews and on-the-spot reporting from the BBC World Service. Now, if you want to comment on this podcast or the topics covered in it, you can send us an email. The address is globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk. Or you could post a message on the BBC World Service Facebook page. Go to facebook.com/BBC World Service. In Poland, an investigation is underway into the rape and murder of around 20 Jewish women during the Second World War. The inquiry is one of several looking into crimes committed by Poles against Jews in northeastern Poland during the summer of 1941, when the German army drove out the Soviet occupiers. At the outbreak of war, Poland was home to the largest Jewish community in Europe. And as our correspondent Adam Easton reports, the crimes are challenging the way Poles see both themselves and their relations with their former Jewish neighbours.
The women were aged between 15 and 30. Closed into the Szczecin ghetto by the Germans, they were allowed out to work in the fields. One day in August 1941, it's thought a group of Polish men took the women into a nearby forest, where they raped them and clubbed them to death before stealing their clothes. The Polish Institute of National Remembrance, which has launched the investigation, hopes to clarify the circumstances around the crime. It's part of a process that started more than a decade ago, with the revelation that Poles burnt hundreds of their Jewish neighbours to death in a barn in nearby Jedwabne, according to Poland's chief rabbi, Michael Szudryk.
It came as a shock to the Polish nation to know that members of the Polish nation had also committed atrocities. Nothing to be compared to what the Germans did, but still that those images that Poles were victims, only victims, was shattered, that there were some Poles that did horrible things. And this country faced that very difficult new facts, the reality that it was there, but it was new to them, hidden under the communists. And they really faced it with great bravery and courage. Not everyone, but many.
In communist Poland, discussion of all things Jewish was taboo. The authorities deliberately obscured the issue by lumping together all the country's 6 million war casualties as simply victims of fascism. Generations of Poles have grown up with the belief that the nation was solely a victim of the war. But today, every schoolchild knows that more Poles risked their lives to save Jews than in any other occupied country in Europe. Rabbi Szudryk again.
What's happening now with this new investigation is in some ways a continuing to face the bitter, painful, but truthful past. You cannot build a healthy future if you don't have an honest understanding of the past. And that's what Poland is doing.
Poland's chief rabbi Michael Szudryk ending that report from Adam Easton. The effects of last year's tsunami were felt not just in Japan. The meltdown at the Fukushima nuclear plant got the world thinking about the safety of nuclear power stations, and nowhere more so than in Germany, where the government has decided to get rid of nuclear power. But Germany's decision to cut the subsidies for green energy at the same time is putting pressure on its renewable energy industry. One maker of solar panels has gone bust, and now experts say a bubble is bursting. Here's our Berlin correspondent, Steve Evans.
Just over a year ago, to much applause, Angela Merkel made a big announcement.
Und nun, meine Damen und Herren, gibt es in Deutschland mehr Einigkeit?
Germany, one of the world's most advanced industrial economies, would close its nuclear power stations within 10 years, she said. 7 of them would and did shut immediately. Green energy would be the future. But now that the applause has died down, hard questions are getting louder. Solar power has expanded in Germany, so now about half of all the world's solar panels are here. But that's been done partly by subsidies. all consumers pay extra on their electricity bills. Now, though, the subsidies are being reduced. Some manufacturers of solar panels are going bust. Others, like Q-Cells, feel a much harsher wind. Ines von Spies is one of its executives.
There's a lot of pressure on makers of solar panels because we have a very, very high oversupply. The pressure is rising dramatically.
Solar farm operators and homeowners with solar panels on their roofs received more than €8 billion in subsidies in 2011. The electricity they generated made up 3% of Germany's total supply, and at unpredictable times. Germany is not the sunniest of countries. So, according to Professor Claudia Kempfert, the energy specialist at the German Institute for Economic Research, a bubble is bursting.
There was an over-subsidizing the sector, and there was a bubble, and now there's a reduction of the whole sector.
There are consequences as the solar power industry adjusts.
Companies established all over Germany, and therefore there was an increase also in employment of those companies of 40,000 people in 2010 alone. So you see there was a huge increase of companies, of amount of solar power, and this bubble will decline now.
If you want to know what renewable energy can and can't do in Germany, you need to come to the village of Feldheim, crisp and misty and frosty in the countryside of Brandenburg to the east of the country. Feldheim is a showcase because it's completely powered by renewable energy. All around are wind turbines. It's a small village, only 37 homes, but completely surrounded by a wind farm. The villagers, 145 of them, get cheap, completely clean electricity.
The people at Feldheim pay an electricity price which is about 30% less than in other places in Germany.
Werner Frohwitter is from Energiequelle, which is behind the scheme.
The electric power comes from the wind park here and is brought into the village by an own distribution network, and all financed by the people with loans, of course.
But there are constraints on wind.
Wind turbines are not everywhere accepted. Most people in Germany and other countries of the world do want electric power, but they do not want to see the facilities to produce electric power. But if you involve the people into the process, if you let them see that they profit from it economically, not only ecologically, then people will give you a higher degree of social acceptance.
A year ago, the chants of the name of the failed Japanese nuclear power plant rang in Chancellor Merkel's ears. She is a scientist, and those close to her say she simply re-evaluated evidence when she undid Germany's nuclear policy. Those to her left in Parliament say she did the right thing, but they're now worried about imports of electricity from Poland, the Czech Republic and France, all of which have nuclear power stations. There's no doubting German ingenuity and commitment to technology. But the sceptics now say that if green energy can't fill the gap when German nuclear finally goes, there will be plenty of sellers of coal and of nuclear power from the surrounding countries to fill the gap.
Steve Evans in Berlin, and that's all from us for now. An updated version of this Global News podcast will be available for you to download on Monday. This is Andrew Peach, and until next time, goodbye.